Somewhere in the outer reach of known space, there is a planet whose sky runs violet at the edge and gold at the crown. A planet so beautiful that the first human pilots to see it from orbit thought their instruments were malfunctioning. They weren't. The Grand Palace of Kasara rises from that sky like something dreamed rather than built. Crystal spires, gardens suspended in air, light that scatters in directions light was never meant to go. Inside, behind doors marked with gold trim, beyond corridors that make visitors feel small by design, a woman stands alone at a window. She has stood in rooms full of people her entire adult life. She has never been less alone than in this moment. She doesn't know that yet. What she knows is that somewhere in this palace something is broken. And somewhere on a shuttle descending through that violet sky, a man with a battered toolkit and no capacity for careful words is about to open the wrong door. Part 1. The Wrong Room. The gravity stabilizer on the constant meridian had been lying to him for 6 days. Not malfunctioning, lying. There's a difference. A malfunction gives you error codes, data, something to work with. This thing gave him clean readouts every single morning and then quietly destabilized Cargo Bay 4 every single afternoon, like it had a personal grudge in excellent timing. Dex Callum had been elbow deep in its access panel since 0600. It was now 0900. The panel smelled like burnt polymer and broken promises. His diagnostic scanner beeped. He ignored it. It beeped again. "I heard you the first time," he told it. Not out loud in his head, except out loud because 14 years of working alone in engine rooms had blurred that line considerably. The scanner showed him nothing useful, which meant the problem was either very simple or catastrophically complex, and in Dex's experience, it was never simple. He was recalibrating the tertiary relay the third time this week, which meant the tertiary relay wasn't the actual problem, which meant he was going to have to pull the entire housing and start over when his comm unit crackled. Callum, his supervisor, Wren. The man had a gift for delivering bad news with the cheerful efficiency of someone who wasn't going to be the one dealing with it. "I'm busy," Dex said. "Emergency repair, Kasara Prime, Grand Palace." Dex stopped. Not because the words were impressive, because they were specific. Grand Palace meant government. Government meant bureaucracy. Bureaucracy meant 17 people telling him what he couldn't touch before one person finally let him fix the actual problem. What's broken? Primary generator. Cascading failure. Their technical teams can't isolate it. Of course they can't. CAS engineering was beautiful. Genuinely, aesthetically, breathtakingly beautiful. Every component curved like it was designed by someone who moonlighted as a sculptor, which meant when something went wrong, finding the fault was like trying to find a crack in a painting. You could see the whole picture. You just couldn't see the seam. Triple rate, Wren added. They specifically requested human engineers, because human engineers are willing to do things that violate safety protocols. They called it innovative problem solving. Same thing. Dex pulled himself out of the access panel, assessed the gravity stabilizer with the professional detachment of someone who had genuinely stopped caring about it and made a decision. "Fine, but I'm billing for the full day, including the time I spent on this thing." Noted, shuttle in 40 minutes. He grabbed his toolkit, 14 years old, dented in 3 places, missing the original latch. The replacement latch was a piece of wire he'd bent himself, and it held better than the original. He'd learned that early in this job. Sometimes the ugly fix was the right one. Kasara Prime from the air looked like someone had taken a dream and made it load-bearing. The planet's sky ran a deep violet at the horizon and shifted to something between gold and green overhead, and the Grand Palace sat at the center of it all, like it had grown there naturally. Spires of pale crystal caught the light and scattered it in directions light wasn't supposed to go. Gardens floated on anti-gravity platforms above the main structure, trailing vines and flowers that moved in patterns too deliberate to be wind. Dex read his diagnostic reports on the shuttle ride down. He was not unimpressed. He was just not letting it slow him down. The CAS attendant who met him at the landing pad was formal, precise, and had the particular energy of someone who had been assigned a difficult task and was determined to execute it perfectly. Engineer Callum. She inclined her head. Long, elegant ears, the kind that curved in perfect symmetry, which Dex knew from experience meant she was alert and paying close attention. Welcome to the Grand Palace. Before we proceed, there are protocols. Of course there are. Restricted areas are marked with gold trim. You will not enter them. Understood. Decorative elements in the East Wing are structurally integrated. You will not touch them. Got it. The meditation gardens on the upper level are private. Under no circumstances. Yep. She paused. Her ears tilted slightly. The particular tilt of someone who suspected they were being managed. She wasn't wrong. But Dex's scanner had already picked up the power fluctuation signature from the landing pad, and it was pointing him in a very specific direction that had nothing to do with where she was planning to take him. He filed that information away and smiled politely and followed her through corridors that were genuinely trying to make him feel small. They were doing a decent job of it. Everything here was built for a different scale of existence. Ceilings that soared 30 feet up for no structural reason. Archways that defied load calculations. Light that came from everywhere and nowhere diffused through crystal panels in the walls until shadows didn't exist. Dex kept his eyes on his scanner. The generator room was a work of art. He meant that literally and also as a diagnosis. The primary generator for a palace this size should have been utilitarian, efficient, boring. The CAS version was a series of interlocking chambers made from some kind of resonant alloy, each one humming at a frequency designed to complement the others, the whole thing functioning less like machinery and more like music. Spectacular. Also failing in 17 different ways simultaneously, which was the engineering equivalent of a symphony orchestra all going out of tune at once. Dex set his toolkit down, cracked his knuckles, got to work. 3 hours later, he had isolated 14 of the 17 failure points, fixed 11 of them. The remaining 3 were related. He could feel it the way you could feel when a system's problems were symptoms rather than causes. His scanner kept returning to one reading, a feedback loop in the quantum resonance chamber. Straightforward to fix technically. You accessed the primary junction, rerouted the resonance pathway, corrected the harmonic interference. Simple. Clean, elegant. Except the primary junction was behind a door his scanner was now pointing at directly, and that door was marked with gold trim. Dex stared at the door. He looked at his scanner. He looked at the door again. The junction was 20 feet beyond it. The feedback loop would destabilize the entire generator within 48 hours if left uncorrected. Possibly sooner. The diplomatic summit the attendant had mentioned, the one happening tomorrow, would take place in a palace that had just lost primary power. He thought about this for approximately 4 seconds. Then he opened the door. The corridor beyond was different. Less grand, more human somehow, though. That was a strange word for a building that had never been built by humans. The lighting was softer here, warmer, the kind of light designed for comfort rather than impression. The ceiling dropped to a height that actually made sense. The floor was covered in something that absorbed sound. Dex walked quietly, which wasn't a choice so much as a consequence of the floor. His scanner led him to an ornate door at the end of the corridor. The junction was directly behind it. He could see the power signature clearly now, the feedback loop pulsing in slow, inevitable waves like a heartbeat that was gradually going wrong. He put his hand on the door, hesitated. Not because of the gold trim, because some instinct honed by 14 years of working in spaces that weren't his, told him this was different from an equipment room. He opened it anyway. Because 48 hours. Because tomorrow. Because the fix was right there. The room beyond was a meditation chamber. That was the only word for it. Flowing curves everywhere. No hard angles, walls that seemed to breathe in the soft light. A floor-to-ceiling window on the far wall looked out over the floating gardens, and the gardens looked back with that same deliberate, quiet beauty. And standing in the center of the room facing the window was a woman. Dex stopped. She hadn't heard him, or she had, and she was choosing not to react. Either way, she was still her back to him, her posture carrying that particular quality of someone who had learned to hold themselves like they expected to be watched. He noticed the hair first, pale gold, almost white, falling past her shoulders. Then the way she stood, not tense, not relaxed, but carefully balanced like someone who had learned to carry something heavy so long ago they'd forgotten they were carrying it. She was wearing something simple, not the elaborate formal robes he'd seen on the attendants, just simple, which somehow made her harder to ignore. His scanner beeped. She turned. And Dex Callum, who had spent 14 years developing the professional ability to remain unmoved by things that should have moved him, did not quite manage it this time. Her eyes were the color of deep water and violet light, a shade that didn't exist on Earth. Her features were cast that particular architecture of face that human artists had been trying to capture for 2 generations and never quite managed. She looked perhaps 22. He knew enough about caste biology to know that meant nothing about her actual age. What he couldn't explain, and didn't try to, was the way her presence seemed to fill the room without her doing anything at all. She looked at him, not at his scanner, not at his toolkit, at him. "Do you know where you are?" Her voice was Terran Standard with an accent that made every syllable sound intentional, like she had chosen each word the way a musician chooses each note. Dex's social calibration, functional not refined, ran a quick assessment of the situation and arrived at the following conclusion: he had made an error. The error was made. The junction was still 20 feet behind her. The feedback loop was still ticking. "A meditation chamber I wasn't supposed to enter," he said. Honest, it was the only mode he had. "I apologize for the intrusion, but if I don't access the panel behind you in the next," he checked his scanner, "probably 16 hours, your primary generator is going to fail during your diplomatic summit tomorrow, which I'm guessing would be inconvenient." She didn't move. "Do you know who I am?" He looked at her. Really looked. The bearing. The way she occupied the room like she owned it, not with arrogance, with something more settled than that. Something that came from a very long time of simply being certain of her position. His brain assembled available data. Simple clothes that somehow cost more than his annual salary. A stillness that came from practice, not personality. Guards somewhere in a building full of restricted areas and gold trim. His brain said important, probably very important. Maybe his mouth said, "I don't know your name, but you're the most beautiful woman I've seen in 14 years of working in 11 star systems." The silence that followed was the specific kind that happens when a grenade lands somewhere quiet. Behind him, through the still open door, he heard the sound of guards not breathing. The woman's ears, he noticed them now, long and elegant, currently very still, had gone completely rigid. Her violet eyes were fixed on him with an expression cycling through shock, something he couldn't name and something else he really couldn't name. He had definitely made an error. The size of the error was still being calculated. "What?" she said, slowly, carefully, like she was handling something fragile. "Did you just say—" Dex's survival instincts finally showed up to the situation approximately 30 seconds after they would have been useful. He ran a quick cost-benefit analysis on backing down, decided it would make things worse, committed to his original position the way he always committed to a fix, all the way, in no hesitation, no retreat. "Beautiful," he said. His voice was steadier than his confidence. "Striking, the kind of face that makes you understand why people make art." He paused. "Is that inappropriate?" "Because I recognize it might be inappropriate, but it's also accurate, and I have trouble not saying accurate things." From behind him, one of the guards made a sound like they were being quietly strangled. The woman stared at him for a long moment, and then she laughed. It was not a polite laugh, not a careful, calculated social laugh. It was genuine surprise out of her, warm and real, the kind of sound that happens when something catches you completely off guard and you simply don't have the defenses ready. It transformed her entirely. Not that she hadn't been remarkable before. She had. But laughing, she became something different. Less like a painting, more like a person. Her ears shifted from rigid to forward-tilted. In cast body language, Dex had been through enough briefings to know the basics. Forward-tilted meant something between amusement and genuine interest. He took this as a moderately good sign. She turned toward the door where 3 guards stood in various states of professional crisis. "Leave us, Your Majesty," one of them started. "Now." They left with the kind of rapid, reluctant obedience that told him this was unusual and possibly unprecedented and definitely going to generate paperwork. "Your Majesty." Dex's brain processed this information in the same way it processed unexpected technical failures, with the calm, methodical acknowledgement that he had dramatically underestimated the severity of his situation. The Queen of Kasara. Not a diplomat, not a patron, the Queen, sovereign ruler, commander of. He was fuzzy on the specifics, but it was a significant fleet. Head of a civilization that spanned, he thought, 8 or 9 star systems. He had told her she was beautiful, to her face, while covered in generator grease. "So," she said, and her voice had shifted still, that careful, deliberate quality, but warmer now, carrying the traces of the laugh she just had. "You know who I am." "I'm working it out," Dex admitted. "Your Majesty, I apologize for the intrusion, not for—" He stopped, reconsidered. "For the intrusion. Not for the other thing. It was accurate. I stand by accurate things." She studied him. That focused, analytical attention that felt like being read rather than looked at. "You walked into my private meditation chamber," she said, "while covered in what is that polymer residue from the generator housing. It wipes off eventually. You called me beautiful before you knew my name." "Yes." "Before you knew my title." "Yes." "Without any apparent understanding of what you'd just done." "I understood what I'd done," Dex said. "I just didn't adjust the output." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile. Something more private than that. "You still need to access the panel," she said. "If that's acceptable." "Yes." She moved aside with the kind of fluid, unhurried grace that suggested she had never in her life needed to rush anywhere. The panel was exactly where his scanner had said it would be. Dex opened his toolkit with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be, found his resonance calibrator, and got to work. Queener and Vale of Kasara watched him. He didn't look up. He had a job to do, and doing his job was the only thing he was actually qualified for in this room. The feedback loop was exactly what he diagnosed. A harmonic interference pattern in the quantum resonance chamber, cycling through a self-reinforcing sequence that would eventually, within hours, not days, he was revising his estimate, destabilize the entire primary grid. He bypassed the primary relay, rerouted the resonance pathway through the secondary channel, applied a dampening sequence to break the harmonic cycle. His scanner stopped beeping. "There," he said. "Generator should stabilize in about 8 minutes. The cascading failures will stop." He closed the panel, looked up. She was still watching him with that same focused attention, but it had changed somehow, become less formal, more genuinely curious. "You're very good at that," she said. "It's what I do." Dex returned the calibrator to his toolkit. Systems make sense. They follow rules. When they break, there's a reason. You find the reason. You fix the reason. Unlike people. People follow rules too, just more complicated ones. He fastened the toolkit. "I'm generally better with systems." The ghost of a smile. "How long have you been doing this?" 14 years. Before that, 2 years of training. Before that, I grew up watching my father fix things that people said couldn't be fixed." He paused. Hadn't meant to say that last part. It came out anyway. "It's the family trait, I suppose. And you chose to continue it." "I chose to do it across more star systems than he did. But yes." She was quiet for a moment. Through the floor-to-ceiling window, the floating gardens drifted past in the late afternoon light, trailing their impossible flowers. Engineer Callum, he looked at her. You may go. He gathered his toolkit, moved toward the door, stopped not because he intended to, but because something in the way she said it made him turn back. She was watching the gardens. Her posture had returned to that careful balance he had noticed when he first came in, the one that held something heavy so long it had forgotten it was heavy. He should leave. He left. The attendant who met him in the corridor looked like she had recently survived something. The generator is fixed, Dex told her. Should hold through your summit and well beyond. I'll write up the full diagnostic report, but the short version is your resonance chamber was running a feedback loop in the harmonic cycle. Classic failure mode for third-generation cast tech. You might want to schedule quarterly calibrations. She was staring at him. Is there something else? He asked. Her Majesty's private chambers, the attendant said carefully, are restricted. I know. The junction was behind them. Generator failures don't observe access protocols. He adjusted his toolkit. Did I cause a problem? The attendant's expression went through several stages before settling somewhere between disbelief and professional paralysis. You will need to wait, she said. Please. Dex waited. He waited in a receiving room with furniture that was either extremely expensive or extremely old, or both, and he sat on a chair that had not been designed for human proportions and looked at his scanner and reviewed his readings from the generator room and thought very specifically about not thinking about the Queen of Kasara. This was less successful than he would have liked. He was running his third review of the diagnostic data when the door opened. Not the attendant, a guard senior by the look of the insignia with the particular stillness of someone who had been doing this a long time. Her Majesty requests your presence. The garden terrace. Dex looked at his scanner, looked at the guard. Is this, should I be concerned about this? Her Majesty requests your presence, the guard repeated. Right. The garden terrace was a floating platform suspended above the main palace gardens, accessible by a walkway of pale crystal that felt underfoot like walking on something alive. The bioluminescent plants that covered every surface were just beginning to activate as the sun moved toward the horizon, pulses of soft light moving through them in slow waves. Dex had seen a lot of places in 14 years. He'd gotten reasonably good at not being moved by them. He was having some trouble with this one. Queen Erin was standing at the railing when he arrived. She had changed from the simple clothes into something that managed to look both formal and less armored, and she was alone. No guards visible, no attendants, just her and the light in the gardens below drifting past in the early dark. She didn't turn when she heard him. You came, she said. Didn't seem like an invitation you decline. Most people would have been more shaken. She turned then. In this light with the bioluminescent plants beginning their slow pulse, her eyes caught the color in ways that made them seem even more impossible. You broke a significant protocol, entered restricted areas, made a comment that has my entire household staff composing concern memos. I fixed your generator. You did. Something in her expression acknowledged this as a separate fact with separate weight. Sit. There was seating near the railing, low cushion designed for a species with slightly different hip geometry, but close enough. Dex sat. She sat across from him, which was a deliberate choice. An equal arrangement. Not the queen looking down at a contractor. A small table between them held refreshments he didn't recognize in containers shaped like something between a cup and a sculpture. Tell me about your work, she said. Dex blinked. You want to hear about generator maintenance? I want to understand why a man who fixes machines walks into the private chambers of a ruling queen and calls her beautiful without any apparent social calculation whatsoever. It wasn't really a strategy. I know, that's why I'm curious about it. He thought about how to explain this. He wasn't good at explaining himself. Machines he could explain. Machines had reasons. He had impulses that he'd stopped trying to manage around the time he realized managing them required more attention than they were worth. Engineering teaches you to see what's actually there, he said finally. Not what you want to be there. Not what's convenient to be there. What's actually there. You can't fix something if you're editing what you see. He turned his cup or sculpture or whatever it was in his hands. I guess that's extended to how I deal with people. I see what's actually there, I say it. Even when it causes problems. Especially then, if seeing something accurately causes problems that tells you something important about the situation. He looked at her directly. Like right now. I'm having a drink with a queen who called me up here instead of throwing me out, which suggests what I said wasn't entirely unwelcome, even though it should have been by every protocol I'm aware of, which tells me something about your situation. She was quiet for a moment. What does it tell you? That you don't hear it very often. The true thing. The silence that followed was different from the one in the meditation chamber. That one had been loaded with emergency. This one was thoughtful, like something turning over slowly. I have ruled Kasara for 20 years, Erin said. Her voice was even, but there was something underneath it that wasn't. Since I was 19, my mother chose to retire. She wished to pursue research, which our system allows, though it is rarely done. I stepped into the role before I had finished becoming whoever I was going to be. She looked at the gardens below. In 20 years, every word spoken to me has been measured. Every interaction designed to achieve something. No one speaks to me without an objective. Until today. Until a man covered in polymer residue told me I was beautiful while simultaneously asking me to move so he could fix my wall panel. Dex laughed. He hadn't planned to. It came out anyway, and she smiled, a real one this time, not the ghost of one. It changed her face the way the laugh had, made her look less like a queen, more like a person who had forgotten briefly that she was one. Your court, he said. They're panicking right now. My head of security has filed an incident report. My chief of protocol is drafting a memo. Lord Drell. She paused, a fractional hesitation, the kind you only noticed if you were paying attention, has requested a briefing. Lord Drell. My senior advisor. She said it neutrally. Too neutrally in Dex's estimation. The way you said something neutrally when you'd practiced saying it that way. Is he going to be a problem? He is going to have concerns. She picked up her own cup. Lord Drell is always concerned. It is perhaps his most consistent quality. And your concern, she looked at him. My concern, she said carefully, is that I invited a contractor to my private terrace because I wanted to continue a conversation, and I cannot remember the last time I did something purely because I wanted to. Dex sat with that for a moment. How long has it been since I did something purely because I wanted to, since someone looked at you without an objective? Her answer wasn't a word. It was the way she didn't answer, the slight adjustment in her posture, the way her eyes moved briefly to the middle distance, the way someone looks when the answer is a number they're not prepared to say out loud. A long time then. They talked for 2 hours, maybe more. The sun finished setting and the bioluminescent plants reached full illumination, and the gardens below became something out of a story about what beauty was supposed to look like. They talked about systems and power and the loneliness that lived at the top of hierarchies, about his father's repair shop and the first machine he ever fixed at 7 years old, about what it meant to rule a civilization when you'd started before you knew yourself. He didn't try to be charming. He wasn't built for charming. He was built for honest. And honest, apparently, was what she hadn't had in a very long time. He was returning to the quarters they'd assigned him, generous absurdly, so a room with actual windows and furniture that made sense, and a view that would have been distracting under other circumstances when he heard footsteps behind him. Measured, deliberate. The footsteps of someone who wanted to be heard. Engineer Callum. Dex turned. The man was perhaps 58 caste-born by the look of him, with the silver ear chains of high rank and a bearing that suggested he had been important for a long time and expected to continue being important. Not imposing, precise. The kind of person who didn't need to be imposing because they were never in doubt. Lord Drell, I'm guessing. You guessed correctly. Casvindrel inclined his head in the particular way of someone performing courtesy rather than feeling it. I wanted to speak with you before the day concluded. That's direct. I value directness. He said it like a man who had studied directness and decided to deploy it strategically. Her Majesty has shown interest in you. I want to be clear about what that means. Dex waited. The Queen is not well served by attachments, Drell said. Not because she is incapable of them, because they create vulnerabilities. Political vectors. Her Majesty's attention when it fixes on something personal has historically been a slight pause choosing his word, exploitable. You're telling me she's been hurt before. I'm telling you she is the sovereign of a civilization spanning 8-star systems, and her personal feelings are a resource others will attempt to use. Drell's expression was entirely composed. She has experienced this. The experience was not pleasant for her or for the stability of our relations with two neighboring systems at the time. Dex filed this information away. I'm not planning to exploit anything, he said. No one ever plans it, Engineer Callum. That is precisely the problem. Drell regarded him with the flat analytical attention of someone running calculations. You seem genuinely to be what you appear. A skilled technician with no political ambitions and a remarkably low threshold for social filtering. This is unusual. It may even be valuable in small doses. A pause. But the Queen's history suggests that what begins as novelty can become dependence. And dependence for a ruler is a wound that never closes cleanly. Are you warning me or threatening me? Neither. Drell's expression didn't change. I am providing information. What you do with it reflects your character. He inclined his head again. Good evening, Engineer Callum. Your work on the generator was excellent. He walked away with the same measured, deliberate steps. Dex stood in the corridor and thought about what had been said. Not the warning part. He'd registered the warning. He'd disagree with it later in private because disagreeing with careful, powerful men in hallways was inadvisable. The other part, Her Majesty has historically been exploitable. He thought about the way she'd laughed, genuine and surprised, like something that had gotten out before the guards could stop it. He thought about 20 years of every interaction being measured, designed, calculated for advantage. He thought about what it cost carrying something that heavy for that long. His scanner beeped, a message from his supervisor. You were supposed to send the diagnostic report 3 hours ago. Also, the palace staff filed a formal incident report with our company. What did you do? Dex looked at the message, looked at the window at the end of the corridor where the first stars of Kasara's night were beginning to appear through the crystal panels. Looked at the message again. He'd write up the diagnostic report. He'd navigate whatever the incident report meant and whatever Drell's carefully worded warning actually added up to. He'd figure out all of it. But right now he was thinking about a queen who had laughed like she'd forgotten she was allowed to, and the way that changed everything about her, and the fact that Dex Callum was not, had never been, would likely never be the kind of man who heard a true thing and let it go unacknowledged. He went to his room. He didn't sleep for a while. The stars outside moved in slow patterns across the crystal panels. The palace settled into quiet around him, all its beautiful machinery humming at frequencies designed to sound like peace. The generator hummed steadily, fixed for now. Dex had a feeling that was the easiest thing he'd repair in this palace. He was already right about that. He just didn't know yet how right. Part 2. What truth costs 3 weeks? That's how long it took for Dex Callum to become a problem. Not his assessment. Theirs, the courts, the advisors, the 17 people whose entire professional existence depended on knowing exactly what everything meant and assigning it the correct political weight. Dex didn't have political weight. He had a toolkit and a diagnostic scanner and a habit of saying accurate things at inconvenient times. But somehow, in 3 weeks, that had become enough to make Lord Casvindrel file 4 separate internal memos. Enough to make the Palace Protocol Office create an entirely new procedural category. Enough to make the household staff develop a specific expression a kind of controlled, resigned bewilderment that Dex had started thinking of as the Callum face. He was objectively just fixing things. The environmental systems in the East Wing had been running 12% below efficiency for what the maintenance log suggested was approximately 3 years. Nobody had flagged it. The logs were clean. Suspiciously clean, actually, the kind of clean that happened when someone was actively maintaining the appearance of maintenance without doing the actual work. Dex fixed it, wrote up the discrepancy, moved to the next system. The atmospheric processors in the secondary gardens were over-engineered to the point of fragility. Beautiful layered interlocking systems that perform flawlessly under ideal conditions and would cascade catastrophically the moment anything went wrong. He simplified the control pathways, added redundancies, made it ugly and functional. The head of Palace Engineering, a senior CAS official named Sorveth, watched him do it with the expression of a man watching someone commit a crime against aesthetics. "You're removing the harmonic integration layer," Sorveth said. "The harmonic integration layer is why the whole thing fails if one component goes down. It's elegant. It's fragile." Dex closed the panel. Elegant and fragile are not the same thing. I know they look similar from the outside. Sorveth filed a complaint. Dex wrote up his modifications with full technical justification. Erin read both, said nothing publicly. But that evening on the terrace, she asked him, "Do you ever worry that you make things less beautiful when you fix them?" And Dex said, "I worry more about things that look beautiful while they're failing." She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said, "I think I understand that." The evenings had become a pattern. Not official, not scheduled in any ledger or protocol document, because scheduling them would have made them official, and official meant scrutinized, and scrutinized meant every word weighed for political implication. So instead, they simply happened. Aaron would find some reason to be in the upper gardens around sunset. Dex would finish his work and somehow end up there too. They would sit at the railing and watch the light change and talk about everything that wasn't politics. She asked about his father's repair shop. He told her about the first engine he ever rebuilt, 12 years old, something his father had written off as unsalvageable, the particular satisfaction of hearing it turn over clean for the first time. She listened with the focused attention she brought to everything, and he noticed she asked follow-up questions, real ones, the kind that came from actually processing what he'd said rather than waiting for her turn to speak. He told her about the 11 star systems, about the gravity anomaly on Perth Station that turned out to be a 3-inch calibration error someone had been compensating for so long they'd forgotten it was an error. About the cargo freighter captain who swore his ship was haunted, and the actual answer, which was a loose panel in the engine room that resonated at exactly the frequency of human anxiety at 3 a.m. She laughed at that one, the real laugh, the one that still caught him off guard every time because it was so completely unguarded. Not the careful social sound she deployed in formal settings. This was something that escaped before she could decide to let it out warm and genuine and a little helpless around the edges. He told her about the loneliness of the work, moving between ships and stations, never staying anywhere long enough to matter to the place. She listened to that one differently, without the lightness of the other stories, with something more like recognition. She didn't tell him about the loneliness of her work. She didn't have to. He could see it. In the way she sat on the terrace carefully, like someone who had learned to take up exactly the right amount of space, no more. In the way she watched the gardens, like beauty was something she observed rather than participated in. In the way occasionally mid-sentence she would catch herself saying something unguarded and pause, and you could actually see the reflex, the 20-year reflex, move across her face before she let the sentence finish anyway. She was letting it finish more often now. He didn't say anything about that, just kept showing up, kept saying the accurate thing. Let her decide what to do with it. The complaint from Lord Drell came on a Tuesday, not to Dex directly, to Aaron through official channels in the form of a formal advisory document, 7 pages Dex was told afterward, which for a formal advisory document was either very thorough or very alarmed. Dex heard about it secondhand from Mira Tan. Mira was Aaron's personal secretary and the most efficiently honest person in the palace, which made her simultaneously invaluable, and Dex suspected deeply exhausting to work for. She was 31, small, quick-moving, with the particular energy of someone who processed information faster than most people generated it. She had appeared in Dex's workspace 3 days into his residency, introduced herself, assessed him in approximately 45 seconds, and decided apparently that he was trustworthy enough to speak to plainly. She brought him the summary of Drell's advisory over lunch. 7 pages, Dex said. He attached 2 appendices. About me. About the strategic implications of the Queen's sustained personal interest in a non-affiliated human technical contractor. Mira sat across from him, her posture the precise posture of someone delivering information and withholding editorial comment until asked. He's not wrong about the implications. He's wrong about the conclusions. What conclusions? That the implications are negative. She picked up a piece of something that looked like fruit and probably wasn't. Drell sees vulnerability. I see evidence that she's still in there. Dex looked at her. Still in there, he repeated. The person she was before the crown became everything. Mira's voice stayed even. She was 19 when she took the throne. She had to become what the role required before she finished becoming herself. 20 years is a long time to be something required. She set down the object. You make her laugh. Actually laugh. Do you have any idea how rare that is? I'm starting to get a sense of it. Drell is going to push. He'll be careful about it. He's always careful, but he'll push. She looked at him with clear, direct eyes. I'm telling you so you're not surprised when it happens. Dex thought about the night in the corridor. Drell's measured voice. Carefully chosen words. The particular menace of someone who didn't need to threaten because they had better tools than threats. Why are you telling me, he asked. You don't know me. No, but I know her. And you're the first thing in years that's made her seem like she might remember she's a person. Mira stood. Don't waste it. She left. Dex sat with his lunch and thought about vulnerability as a political concept, about the difference between protecting someone and controlling them, about a 7-page advisory with 2 appendices filed about the fact that a queen had left. He found the discrepancy on a Thursday. He'd been reviewing the infrastructure assessment he'd submitted the previous week, routine, the kind of review you did to make sure your documentation was complete before the final report. His methodology was simple. Read what you wrote, compare it to your actual readings, make sure the numbers matched. They didn't. Not all of them. Most were fine. But in the section covering the atmospheric regulation system in the State Hall, the main ceremonial space where the diplomatic summit was scheduled in 11 days, the numbers in his submitted report were different from the numbers in his scanner log. Not slightly different, specifically critically different. His scanner log showed a microfracture in the tertiary pressure seal of the atmospheric system. Small, not immediately dangerous, but in the documentation trail for the system's certification, the documentation that would be reviewed before the summit was officially cleared to proceed. The fracture wasn't there. His submitted report showed a clean certification. He hadn't written that. He sat very still for a moment. Then he ran the comparison again. Same result. His submitted report showed a certification he hadn't given. Someone had accessed his documentation and changed it. Not clumsily, carefully, using the correct technical terminology, inserting the change in the section least likely to be cross-referenced. If he hadn't been running this specific kind of backward comparison, he wouldn't have found it. Whoever did this knew documentation, knew systems, knew exactly which numbers to change to make the alteration survive casual review. Dex sat back and looked at what he was holding. If the microfracture wasn't flagged and repaired before the summit, it would fail under the atmospheric load of a full State Hall. Not catastrophically, not an explosion, nothing dramatic. Just a slow pressure failure that would make the environmental systems in the hall behave erratically. temperature fluctuations, air circulation problems, the kind of thing that would embarrass the palace, disrupt the summit, potentially collapse negotiations that had taken months to arrange. And when someone investigated why the atmospheric certification had passed without catching the fracture, they'd find his name on the report. He would be the one who missed it. He would be the one responsible. He understood this calculation in about 30 seconds because it wasn't complicated. It was actually quite elegant in the way that traps are elegant. Simple mechanism, clean execution, maximum damage. Someone wanted him gone. And they wanted him gone in a way that couldn't be traced back to them. He thought about Drell's advisory document. 7 pages, 2 appendices. He thought about what Mira had said. He'll push. He's always careful. He thought about the specific expertise required to access his documentation, alter it correctly, and leave no visible trace. Then he stopped thinking about who. Because who was secondary? Primary was what did he do now. Option 1. He quietly repaired the microfracture, updated his logs internally, said nothing. The problem went away. The summit proceeded. His certification, if examined later, would show a repair he'd made without flagging the original discrepancy. Unusual, but not damning. He'd be safe. Option 2. He reported it. He reported everything, the discrepancy, the altered documentation, the microfracture, the implication that someone had accessed his files and changed them. He handed it to Aaron and let it land where it would. Investigation. Political disruption. Drell, if it was Drell, would be ready for exactly that response, would have prepared for it, would have made sure his tracks were clean enough to survive scrutiny. And Dex would still be the contractor who had walked into the palace, made the Queen laugh, caused a 7-page advisory memo, and then possibly blown up the diplomatic summit by leveling accusations against the senior advisor without sufficient proof. Option 2 was worse. Tactically, he knew that. He spent approximately 6 minutes considering option 1. Then he picked up his scanner and went to find Aaron. He found her in the administrative wing. Not the terrace. This was working hours and Aaron worked. This was something he hadn't fully appreciated before he'd spent 3 weeks in the palace. The evenings on the terrace were real, but they were a small fraction of her day. The rest was meetings and briefings and decisions, and the particular weight of being the person who everyone brought their most difficult problems to, on the assumption that the most difficult problems were hers by right of title. She was reviewing reports on a holographic display when he came in, and she looked up with the expression she had at the start of their evenings, the one that was trying to be composed and mostly succeeding. "Engineer Callum, I have a problem," he said. "It's not a machinery problem." She set the reports aside. "Close the door." He did. He told her. Cleanly, completely in the order the facts occurred. The routine review, the numerical discrepancy, the altered documentation, the microfracture that should have been flagged, the implication. She listened without interrupting. Her expression didn't change, which he was learning meant she was processing something significant. The composure wasn't indifference. It was the thing she did when she needed to think clearly and couldn't afford to feel first. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You could have repaired it quietly," she said. "Yes." "That would have been safer for you." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" Dex looked at her directly. "Because it's not true. My report shows a clean certification I didn't give. That's not true. I don't leave things that aren't true standing if I can correct them." Something moved across her face, too fast to read. "Show me," she said. He showed her. Scanner logs, submitted documentation, the specific numbers, the specific discrepancy. She reviewed it with the focused attention she brought to everything, not quickly, not performatively, but with genuine systematic thoroughness. Then she called Mira. "Get me Lord Drell," she said, "and the palace documentation security officer." Mira looked at Dex, then at Aaron. A single swift assessment. "Yes, Your Majesty," she said. The investigation took 4 days. Dex was not included in it. He was asked to submit his scanner logs, his full documentation record, and a detailed account of his methodology. He did. Then he went back to work on the secondary garden systems because the atmospheric processors still needed calibration, and standing around waiting for political processes to resolve was not something his nervous system was well equipped for. He didn't see Aaron during the 4 days. That was also not a surprise. He did see Drell once passing in a corridor, the senior advisor with two staff members, moving at the pace of someone with several important things to do and no intention of discussing them. Drell looked at him, not with hostility, with the precise calibrated gaze of someone running calculations. Dex looked back. Neither of them said anything. On the 4th day, Mira appeared in the secondary garden. "The investigation is concluded," she said, and she sat down on the low wall beside the atmospheric panel he was working on, which meant she wasn't delivering good news standing up. "Insufficient evidence," she said. "The documentation access logs show the changes were made using a valid maintenance credentials pathway. The credentials belong to a decommissioned service account that 7 different personnel had access to at various points over the past 2 years. Dex set down his calibrator. "So nothing." "No attribution," Mira said carefully, "which is not the same as nothing. Lord Drell knows what was found. He knows what wasn't found. He knows you reported it instead of covering it." She paused. "He requested a meeting with Her Majesty this morning." "What kind of meeting?" "The kind with formal documentation." Her voice stayed even. "He submitted a petition, signed by 11 members of the Noble Assembly, requesting your removal from the palace on grounds of diplomatic sensitivity." Dex was quiet for a moment. "Diplomatic sensitivity," he repeated. "Your presence is described as an unquantified variable in a politically significant period that creates unnecessary exposure for the sovereign." She said it without inflection, like she was reading a weather report. 11 signatures is a formal threshold. It requires a response. "What kind of response?" Mira looked at him, and in that look and the precise, careful way she held his gaze, he understood. The kind of response that had 2 options. Aaron could reject the petition, which required formal justification, public documentation, and the kind of political capital that generated exactly the scrutiny she'd been trying to avoid, or she could sign it. When Dex said, "She's reviewing it now." He nodded, picked up his calibrator, put it down again. "Mira." "Yes." "Is she okay?" A pause, long enough to mean something. "She's the queen," Mira said. "She's always okay." Another pause. "No, she's not okay." Aaron signed the petition that afternoon. Dex found out from the formal notification delivered to his quarters by a guard with a carefully neutral expression. He had 48 hours to conclude his work and arrange departure. His full contract payment would be honored. The palace extended its gratitude for his technical contributions. Very clean, very formal, very final. He sat on the edge of his bed, the absurdly comfortable bed in the absurdly generous quarters, and read the notification twice, then set it down, then picked it up and read it again, which didn't change anything, but his hands needed something to do. 48 hours. He thought about the generator, the meditation chamber, her laugh, that first one surprised out of her, real and unguarded and completely unlike anything she let herself be in public. He thought about the evenings on the terrace, the stories she'd asked about, the way she listened like listening was something she'd had to relearn. He thought about a woman who had been the queen since she was 19, who had spent 20 years learning to hold every true thing at arm's length because true things were vulnerabilities, who had for 3 weeks let herself be slightly less careful, and who had just learned again what being less careful cost. He understood why she'd signed it. He didn't even fully disagree with it. The petition had 11 signatures. The political calculation was real. Drell was careful and prepared and had built this specific trap to force exactly this choice. He understood all of it. It still felt like something breaking. He spent the first evening packing. There wasn't much. He'd never been someone who accumulated things. 2 bags, the toolkit his scanner. Everything he owned fit in the same space it had always fit. He was sealing the second bag when his door chimed. He knew before he opened it. Erin was standing in the corridor in what he recognized as the end-of-day version of herself, the version that existed after the formal robes came off and the formal bearing with them. Simpler clothes, the ear chains gone. She looked younger without them and also somehow older because what was underneath didn't have the armor the formal version carried. She looked at him, he looked at her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "You should come in," he said, "if you want." She came in. She moved to the window the way she always moved to windows, drawn to the outside view to the gardens and the darkness below, standing at the edge of things rather than the center. He'd noticed this about her. She was always slightly peripheral to the spaces she occupied, even the ones she owned. "I want to explain," she said. "You don't need to. I want to." She turned from the window. Drell's petition was formally correct. 11 signatures constitutes a binding consultation requirement under our governance structure. Rejecting it required either formal justification that would generate public documentation of my personal interest in you, which gives Drell exactly the leverage he's been building toward, or accepting it. "I know," Dex said. "I worked it out." "Then you understand." "I understand why you did it?" He met her eyes. "That doesn't mean it's right." Silence. "No," she said. "It doesn't mean it's right." Her voice was very quiet. "I spent 20 years making decisions that are correct and not right. I thought I'd made peace with that." A pause. "I hadn't." Dex sat down on the edge of the bed. She stayed standing by the window. The gardens drifted past behind her, bioluminescent and slow. "What did Drell actually want?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Control," she said, not maliciously. "He genuinely believes the Kasserin system functions better when the sovereign's personal feelings are subordinated to institutional process. He believes attachments compromise judgment. He believes—" She paused. "He believes he's protecting me. By making you more alone. By making me more predictable." Her jaw tightened slightly. "Which is in his framework the same thing." "Is it the same thing?" She looked at him directly. And for a moment, a long, still moment, she didn't look like a queen. She looked like a woman who had been answering that question wrong for a very long time and had recently started to suspect it. "No," she said, "it isn't." He stood up, crossed to where she was standing by the window. Not close, just closer. Close enough that she'd have to make a choice if she wanted to step back. She didn't step back. "I have 48 hours, he said. "I'm going to use them to finish my work on the secondary garden systems. Because the calibration is only halfway done, and someone's going to have to finish it, and I'd rather it be me." He looked at her steadily. "And then I'm going to leave. Because you signed the petition, and I'm going to respect that. Even if I think Drell played you." Her eyes sharpened. "He didn't. He built a situation where every option you had gave him something," Dex said. "That's what playing someone looks like. It doesn't require bad intentions. It just requires thinking 3 moves ahead." He held her gaze. "You're smarter than he is. You know that." The silence stretched. "I know," she said. Very quiet. "I know, and I signed it anyway. Because you didn't have another move. Because I was afraid." She said it like she'd never said it out loud before. Maybe she hadn't. "I was afraid of what they'd find, of what they'd document, of what it would mean officially, formally in the public record to choose you over the petition." A breath. "I have spent 20 years making decisions that cannot be questioned later. And this one could be questioned. Extensively." Dex thought about this. "What would they find?" he asked. "In the documentation, if you'd rejected it." She met his eyes. "Evidence," she said carefully, "that the Queen of Kassara had developed a personal attachment to a human engineer who called her beautiful in her own meditation chamber." A pause. which is accurate, which makes it exactly the kind of true thing that causes problems. Her expression shifted, something between pain and a reluctant, complicated smile. Yes, she said, exactly that. They stood there, the palace quiet around them, 48 hours already starting to feel like a countdown. Mira thinks you made a mistake, Dex said. Mira tells me when she thinks I've made a mistake. It's her most reliable quality and her most irritating one. A pause. She's not wrong. So what do you do with that? She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched his hand. Brief, just a moment of contact. The kind of touch that happened when words weren't enough and you needed something true. I don't know yet, she said, but I wanted you to know that I know. Her fingers withdrew. That matters to me. That you know. Dex nodded. Get some sleep, he said. You have a summit to prepare for. I do. She moved toward the door, paused, didn't turn. Dex, first name. She'd used it exactly twice before. Both times it had meant something different. Yeah. Thank you for reporting it instead of covering it. She paused. I know that was the harder choice. It was the right choice. Yes. Very quiet. It was. She left. He stood at the window for a long time after. The gardens outside, the palace settling into night. In 9 days counting, from tomorrow after his 48 hours were up, there would be a diplomatic summit in the State Hall. Dignitaries from 6 systems. A full atmospheric load on a system he had certified clean and then discovered wasn't clean and reported and been expelled for reporting. He'd repaired the microfracture before he submitted his revised documentation. Obviously, that was never in question. The fracture was fixed. But the system it lived inside, the atmospheric regulation network for the State Hall, had been designed by the same philosophy as everything else in this palace. Beautiful, elegant, interlocking. The kind of system that performed flawlessly under ideal conditions and would cascade catastrophically if anything else went wrong. And Dex knew because he'd been through the full schematics that the fracture he'd found wasn't the only vulnerability. There were 3 others he'd flagged in his internal notes and planned to address in the second phase of his assessment, the phase he wasn't going to be here for. He thought about Drell, careful and prepared managing this palace's systems, all of them mechanical and political for a very long time. Who had known the result of the investigation before Dex did? Who had not at any point seemed surprised? He thought about the summit, the State Hall, the atmospheric load. He thought about fragile things that failed slowly, component by component, each failure triggering the next until the whole elegant structure came apart. Dex stood at the window. He had 48 hours. He was going to use every one of them, not just on the secondary garden calibration, on documentation. Complete, detailed, technically unimpeachable documentation of every vulnerability in the State Hall atmospheric system. All 4 of them. Time-stamped, cross-referenced, submitted through 3 separate channels so that no single access point could alter all of it. He couldn't stay. But he could make sure that what he'd built here, the unglamorous, practical, functional work of making fragile things durable, couldn't be undone just because he was gone. Some fixes held even after the engineer left. That was the whole point of doing them right. He picked up his scanner, got to work. Outside, the Kasara night moved slowly past, indifferent to the calculations happening below. The palace hummed around him, all its beautiful, interlocking, elegant systems running exactly as designed. For now. Part 3, the system that held. He left on a Tuesday, which felt wrong somehow. Tuesdays were for broken gravity stabilizers and routine diagnostics and the ordinary grinding work of keeping things running. Tuesdays were not for leaving places that had started to feel like something. But Dex Callum had never been good at deciding how things should feel, only at deciding what to do about them. So he sealed his 2 bags, picked up his toolkit, walked through the corridors of the Grand Palace of Kasara for what he told himself was the last time past the soaring ceilings and the light that came from everywhere, and the decorative elements that were also structural components, if you knew where to look. He knew where to look now. 3 weeks in this place had given him that at least. The guard at the landing pad was professional, courteous, gave him nothing to read in his expression, which was its own kind of information. Mira met him there, which he hadn't expected. She handed him a data chip. Her Majesty asked me to give you this, she said. It's the full maintenance schedule for the secondary garden systems. So whoever finishes the calibration knows what you already did. Dex took the chip, looked at it. She wrote it herself. She wrote it herself. He put it in his pocket. Is she, he started. She's in morning briefings. Mira's voice was even. She will be in morning briefings until approximately noon. Then the pre-summit coordination meeting, then the formal reception walkthrough. She's busy. She is always busy. A pause. She asked me to tell you that the secondary garden systems will be well looked after, which meant something. He knew it meant something. Tell her the documentation I submitted yesterday covers the full vulnerability assessment for the State Hall systems. All 4 points, not just the fracture. She should make sure whoever handles the pre-summit technical review goes through the complete file. Mira looked at him. All 4, she said. All 4. Something shifted in her expression, just slightly, the professional composure developing a small fracture of its own. I'll tell her, she said. He nodded, picked up his bags, walked to the shuttle. He didn't look back. Not because he didn't want to. The shuttle back to the constant meridian took 4 hours. He spent the first hour reviewing his documentation, making sure everything was filed correctly, cross-referenced, time-stamped. 3 separate submission channels just as he'd planned. Whatever happened in that State Hall in 9 days, his records were clean and complete and accessible to anyone who needed them. He spent the second hour not thinking about the terrace. This was less successful than he would have liked. The conversations kept surfacing anyway. Her voice and the particular quality it had when she was saying something true, the way her ears tilted forward when something genuinely caught her attention, the specific texture of a silence between 2 people who had stopped performing for each other. He spent the 3rd hour sleeping because he'd been working for 40 hours straight, and his body had opinions about that. He spent the 4th hour looking at the job specs Ren had forwarded. Water reclamation system on Pereth Station, running warm for 6 months. Nobody could figure out why. He already had a theory. His comm unit chimed as he was reading. His supervisor. You're back, Ren said. I'm back. The incident report from the palace was interesting reading. I'm sure it was. You want to tell me what actually happened? Dex thought about this. I fixed their generator, he said. Then I found some additional problems. Then I fixed those. A pause. Then I left. Silence on the other end. The incident report has 14 pages, Ren said slowly. People there are very thorough. Another silence. You're on the rotation starting Thursday, Ren said. Pereth Station water reclamation, running warm for 6 months. I know, I'm reading the specs. Callum. Yeah. Whatever you actually did over there. A pause, Ren choosing words which was unusual for him. The palace paid your full contract plus 30%. No explanation, just a notation that said quality of work exceeded standard. Dex was quiet for a moment. I fixed some things, he said. Apparently. He closed the comm, looked at the planet shrinking in the viewport. Violet horizon, gold-green sky. The palace too small to see now, but he knew exactly where it was. He'd mapped the whole grounds in his first week. Force of habit. Pereth Station smelled like recycled air in industrial solvent, which was the smell of honest work, and Dex found it easier to breathe here than he'd expected. He dug into the water reclamation job with the focused intensity that was his default setting when other things needed not thinking about. The answer was exactly what he'd suspected from the specs: a mineral deposit on the primary heat exchanger building for 18 months. Embarrassing, because someone should have caught it at the 12-month service check. He found two additional problems while he was in there. Fixed those two. Wrote up a complete report. 8 days after leaving Kasara, his comm unit chimed. Unknown origin. Kasara routing. He almost didn't answer. Callum, he said. Dex. Mira's voice, tight in a way he'd never heard it before. Something happened. He set down the descaling tool. Tell me. Last night, during the pre-summit formal reception, the atmospheric system in the State Hall. She stopped. He could hear her composing herself. There was a failure event. Everything in him went still. What kind of failure? Pressure cascade, the tertiary regulation network. It started in the secondary coupling. Her voice was careful now, specific, reading from something. The on-duty technical team is saying it originated at junction point 7 in the ventilation array. Junction point 7. He knew junction point 7. It was the third vulnerability he'd flagged in his complete documentation. Not the fracture he'd repaired the third one. A stress point in the secondary coupling that needed reinforcement before the summit. He'd documented it clearly. Cross-referenced to the primary failure risk. Filed in all three channels. Was anyone hurt? No, no one was hurt. A breath. But it could have been Dex if the system had been running at full summit capacity with a full State Hall. How bad would it have been? A pause. Bad, she said quietly. Not explosive, but a full pressure cascade in an enclosed space that size with that atmospheric load. She stopped. The medical assessment was not reassuring. He sat down on the floor of the maintenance access corridor. The modifications I made to the East Wing atmospheric processors, he said, they held. Her voice shifted, something releasing in it. That's why I'm calling. The cascade should have propagated through the entire network. That's what the technical team is saying. The State Hall failure should have triggered the adjacent systems, but your modifications to the East Wing processors created a pressure break that contained the failure to the State Hall only. She paused. The containment wasn't designed. It wasn't intentional on your part. It was just the redundancies. He said it quietly. I added redundancy loops to the adjacent systems in case one failed. Yes. He thought about Sorvith. You're removing the harmonic integration layer. Thought about his own answer. The harmonic integration layer is why the whole thing fails if one component goes down. The elegant system had failed. The ugly one had held. Mira, his voice came out steadier than he expected. Where did the failure originate exactly? Not the cascade, the initiation point. Silence. Long enough to mean something. That's the other reason I'm calling, she said. The technical investigation found evidence of deliberate interference, a modified component in the junction 7 coupling, introduced into the system within the last 2 weeks. 2 weeks. After Dex had filed his vulnerability assessment. After someone had known exactly which junction points were flagged as risks. After the documentation access incident that had returned insufficient evidence and no attribution. Mira. Yes. Who had access to the State Hall systems in the last 2 weeks? The pause this time was very long. That's what Her Majesty is asking, Mira said. Right now, in the formal inquiry she opened this morning. He didn't go back immediately, not because he wasn't asked. Mira called again 2 days later, official request for his documentation and technical testimony in the inquiry. He submitted everything remotely, complete records, every log, every timestamp, the full vulnerability assessment with all 4 points clearly documented and dated. He finished the Pereth station job, found the secondary problem in the filtration array, Fix that too. Wrote up a complete report with preventive maintenance recommendations for the next 18 months, because if you were going to do the work, you might as well do it right. He thought about Kasara, not in the indulgent way he'd been resisting on the shuttle. Practically, he turned the facts over the way he turned over technical problems, looking for what they actually showed rather than what he wanted them to show. He thought about the petition, 11 signatures, the specific architecture of a trap that left no clean exit. He thought about Drell, who had built that trap with the calm precision of someone who believed he was managing things that needed managing, who had opened a door through that decommissioned credentials pathway, through the documentation alteration, and apparently hadn't fully considered who else might walk through it. He thought about the East Wing processors, the redundancy loops, the unglamorous reinforcement he'd added because his work didn't get done halfway. He thought about Erin standing by the window. I was afraid, said like it was the first time she'd let herself say it. His comm unit chimed on a Thursday afternoon. Unknown origin, Kasara routing. Not Mira this time. He knew before he answered. Engineer Callum, Erin said. Same formality as this beginning. Except not. Her voice carried the same weight it always had, careful, deliberate, every word chosen. But underneath it, something that wasn't there in the beginning. Something that had been built over 3 weeks of evenings and was still there apparently even after everything. Your Majesty, he said. A pause. I wanted to tell you myself, she said, before you heard it through other channels. Heard what? The inquiry concluded this morning. Her voice was even, controlled in the way it was when control was costing her something. The modified component in Junction 7 was traced to a specific service access conducted 10 days before the summit. The access credentials belonged to a decommissioned account. A pause, Dome. The same decommissioned account that was used to alter your documentation. Dex was quiet. The inquiry team identified the physical access logs for that service corridor, Erin continued. There were 3 people with clearance to that area on the relevant date. Another pause. Lord Drell was one of them. Silence. Pereth Station hummed around him, the constant low-frequency vibration of a place that existed to process things. But the silence on the comm line was complete. Did he admit it? Dex asked. He admitted to the documentation access, she said carefully. He maintains the junction modification was performed by someone else using the same credentials, someone he cannot identify. A pause. I believe him about the second part. It is possible he was not the only person who understood what he was building. He opened a door, Dex said, and someone else walked through it. Yes, very quiet. That is my assessment. He sat with this for a moment. The specific tragedy of someone who believed they were controlling a situation they were only partly controlling, who had built careful mechanisms that careful people from outside could turn to different ends. What happens to him, he asked. He has resigned as senior advisor, Erin said. He will retain his title and his lands. He will not hold a position of governmental authority again. A pause. He is not a young man. He has served Kasara for 30 years. He made decisions that were wrong, in ways that could have been catastrophic. Another pause. I find I cannot bring myself to destroy him entirely. That's either wise or generous. I haven't decided which. And there, just for a moment, something in her voice, not quite a smile, but in the vicinity of one. The diplomatic summit proceeded. Different venue, the secondary hall. The negotiations are going well. Good. Your documentation, she said. The complete vulnerability assessment. It was entered into the formal record of the inquiry. Every member of the Noble Assembly has been required to read it. A pause. It has been described by several parties as the most thorough technical assessment ever submitted to the Palace Maintenance Office. I had 48 hours and something to prove. Yes. Quiet. I know. A different kind of silence now, less loaded, more like the silences on the terrace when something had been said and they were both sitting with it. Erin, he said. A pause. He'd used her name. without a title. It felt like something. Yes, she said, just that. The petition, 11 signatures. You signed it because you didn't have another move. Yes, but you have different moves now. A longer pause. The inquiry, she said slowly, has rather significantly shifted the political landscape. A breath. 11 of the signatures on Drell's petition came from advisors who are currently reviewing their positions very carefully. How carefully? Carefully enough that 3 of them have requested private audiences to express their personal confidence in my judgment. Something dry in her voice now. The specific dryness of someone who had watched people reverse their positions and was choosing not to comment on it directly. Circumstances have changed. Circumstances, Dex said, or information. A pause. Both, she said. Information changed the circumstances. It usually does. Another silence. I have a proposal, she said. A formal one. It will be submitted through official channels, which means it will be in the palace record, which means it is not something I'm doing quietly. Okay. The position of Chief Technical Consultant to the Royal House of Kasara is currently vacant. Her voice was careful, deliberate, the way she was when something mattered enough to make sure every word was exactly right. The role carries formal status as a member of the royal household. It provides diplomatic protections, access to palace systems, compensation commensurate with the responsibility. A pause. And it would require the consultant to be present in the palace on a permanent basis. Dex was quiet. He thought about the constant meridian, about Pereth Station, about 11 star systems and 2 bags and a toolkit, in the particular life of a man who moved between broken things and fixed them and moved on. The clean simplicity of it, the way nothing accumulated. He thought about a terrace at sunset, a real laugh surprised out of someone who hadn't expected to laugh. A window in the dark and a woman who stood slightly peripheral to every space she occupied as if she'd learned to take up exactly the right amount of room and no more. He thought about 48 hours and work left unfinished and documentation filed through 3 separate channels because he refused to leave things broken if he could help it. That's a formal proposal, he said. It is. Submitted through official channels? Yes. So it's in the record? Yes. Meaning you've already decided? A pause, just long enough. I find, Aaron said carefully, that I have been making decisions based on what cannot be questioned later, for a very long time. A breath. I would like for once to make a decision based on what is true, even if it can be questioned. Dex looked at the manifold in front of him, the descaling tool, the heat exchanger that had been running warm for 6 months because nobody wanted to get into the access corridor and look at what was actually there. Simple problems. Most of them, when you were willing to look. The secondary garden calibration, he said. Is it finished? A pause, then quietly, no. It needs to be finished. It does. I left it halfway. You did. That bothers me. And they're unmistakable this time, the real thing. In her voice. Warm and unguarded the way things were when they escaped before she could decide to let them out. I know it does, she said. That's part of why I'm asking. He sat back, looked at the ceiling of the maintenance corridor. The clean, functional infrastructure of a station that worked because someone had built it to work and not to impress anyone. I'll need to finish the Pereth job, he said. 2 more days. Of course. And I'll need access to the complete technical documentation when I get there. Everything, not just the systems I worked on before. You'll have it. And someone needs to tell Sorveth that the harmonic integration layer was the problem, not the solution. He's going to need to hear it more than once. I will personally ensure he hears it the requisite number of times. How many is that? However many it takes, she said. I have learned that some things need to be said until they're understood. He thought about that. about the specific patience required to say a true thing into a system that didn't want to hear it, again and again, until it finally landed. Okay, he said, just that, one word. On the other end of the comm, he heard her exhale. Not dramatically, just release. The specific sound of a breath held too long, finally finding its way out. Okay, she said. He finished the Pereth station job in 2 days, fixed the heat exchanger, addressed the filtration array issue, wrote up a complete report with maintenance recommendations for the next 18 months. His supervisor called. You're going back, Wren said. Not a question. Yeah. To the palace. Yeah. Chief technical consultant to the Royal House of Kasara. He said it slowly, like he was reading it off something, which he probably was. That's a title. It is. You went there to fix a generator. I did. A longer pause. I'm going to need to update your employment classification, Wren said. This is going to be a very strange form to fill out. I'll write you a technical justification, Dex said. For the form. Please don't. The shuttle into Kasara Prime on a Saturday morning. Same approach as before. That violet horizon. The gold-green sky. The palace growing larger in the viewport, its crystal spires catching light in directions light wasn't supposed to go. He didn't read his documentation this time. He looked out the window. He noticed things he hadn't noticed on the first approach. The specific pattern of the floating gardens from above, they weren't random, weren't decorative. They followed the load distribution of the anti-gravity array beneath. Structural logic expressed as beauty. Someone had designed this with both things in mind, elegance and function, and gotten both right. He was going to have to find whoever designed that array. He had questions. The landing pad was the same landing pad. Different guard someone knew who checked his credentials with professional efficiency and then said with a formality that was slightly too careful to be completely natural. Welcome back, Consultant Callum. Consultant Callum. He was going to need to get used to that. Mira was waiting inside. She looked at him with the expression of someone who had managed a very difficult week and was genuinely glad to have one fewer difficult thing in front of her. The secondary garden systems, she said by way of greeting. I know. The calibration sequence you left is holding, but it needs... I know, Mira. She stopped, looked at him, and then unexpectedly she smiled. Brief. Real. She's in the administrative wing, she said. Morning briefings. She'll be done by 10. I'll start with the garden systems. I thought you might. She fell into step beside him. Sorvith has been notified that you're returning. He is preparing himself. To hear about the harmonic integration layer again, he described it to me as bracing for constructive input. A pause. I believe he's been practicing. Dex laughed. It came out easier than he'd expected, like something that had been held in tension for 2 weeks had been given permission to relax. The secondary garden atmospheric processors were exactly where he'd left them, half-calibrated. The sequence he'd initiated was holding the way he'd set it up to hold, but it needed the second phase to be stable long-term. He could see immediately what needed to be done. 3 hours, maybe 4. He opened his toolkit, got to work. He was in the second hour when he heard footsteps behind him. Not the guard's measured pace, not Mira's quick efficiency. Different. He didn't turn immediately. Finish the adjustment he was making because you finished what you were doing that was basic, and then closed the panel and straightened up. Erin was standing in the entrance to the garden. Not in formal robes, the simpler version of herself, the one that existed when she decided something. Her ears without the formal chains. Her pale gold hair catching the morning light through the crystal panels. She looked at him. He looked at her. Something that had been held in both of them for different reasons and across different distances quietly released. The calibration, he said. Yes. It needs another 2 hours. Then it needs another 2 hours. He turned back to the panel. She moved into the garden, not to leave to stay. To stand near the edge the way she always did, watching the plants pulse through their slow bioluminescent rhythm. They didn't talk for a while, which was fine. They'd gotten good at silence over 3 weeks of evenings, the kind that wasn't absence, just space for things to be what they were without needing to be named. He ran the second calibration sequence, checked the readings twice, cross-referenced against the baseline he'd established in week 1, clean, stable, the way things should be when someone had taken the time to do it right. He closed the toolkit. Done, he said. Erin turned from the garden's edge. There was an expression on her face he hadn't seen before, or had seen only in pieces, never assembled quite like this. Like something she'd been deciding for a long time had finally been decided. The State Hall systems, she said. The complete remediation is going to take 3 weeks. Possibly 4. Probably 4, he said, if you want it done right. I want it done right. Then 4. And then there's the East Wing secondary network, which Sorveth tells me needs a full structural review. It does. That's another 2 weeks. And the communication array in the North Tower has been running on a temporary patch for, she paused, apparently 8 months. That's a separate job entirely. Yes, a pause. Everything, it seems, has been running on temporary patches for much longer than is advisable. He looked at her. She looked at him. Good thing you have a chief technical consultant, he said. And there it was, the laugh, surprised out of her, the way it always was, the way it had been from the very first time in the meditation chamber. Real and warm and completely unguarded, scattering off the crystal panels, filling the quiet space with something that had no technical designation, but the Dex understood completely. The way he understood things he couldn't fully explain. Not analytically, just completely. Yes, she said when she'd caught her breath. A very good thing. He picked up his toolkit. She fell into step beside him as he moved toward the exit. Not in front, not behind, beside. The way two people walked when they'd stopped performing for each other and were just going somewhere together. The State Hall, he said. I'll need the full schematics. You'll have them by noon. And Sorveth needs to be in the initial assessment. He knows these systems better than anyone, even if his philosophy about them needs adjustment, she said. I was going to say recalibration. Of course you were. They walked through the corridor, the one with the soaring ceilings and the light from everywhere, and the architectural elements that defied physics. He looked at them differently now than he had on that first walkthrough, not with the detachment of someone cataloging impracticalities, with the attention of someone learning the specifics of a place they planned to spend a long time in. Which elements were structural, which were decorative, where the load was actually sitting, where if something went wrong, you'd go first. Erin, he said. Yes, the documentation I filed, the vulnerability assessment. I have it. All 4 points. All 4, she said. I read it twice. A pause. It is, as noted in the inquiry record, extremely thorough. I had something to prove. You proved it. Quiet. Certain. To everyone who needed to see it. They stopped at the junction where the corridor branched one way to the administrative wing, one way to the technical offices he'd been assigned. She looked at him. He looked at her. I should get the State Hall schematics, he said. You should. And you have briefings. Until noon. And then a pause. Her eyes, that color that didn't exist anywhere else, deep water and violet light, held something that she used to manage more carefully. She'd gotten less careful about it. He thought that was probably the best thing he'd fixed in this palace, though it wasn't in any maintenance log, and Sorveth would have no opinion on it whatsoever. And then, she said, the garden terrace, if you're not still working, I'll be done by noon. Then the terrace. Something in her voice, warm and certain and not performing at all. There are things I've been thinking about that I'd like to say to someone who will tell me honestly whether they're accurate. That's what I do, he said. I know. A pause, and in it something that had weight without being heavy. That's why I'm telling you. She walked toward the administrative wing. He watched her go, the careful balance of her posture, still carrying something, but differently than before. Less like a weight she hadn't chosen, more like something she'd picked up deliberately and decided to carry. He turned toward the technical offices. His scanner beeped. A preliminary pull of the State Hall systems data already routing through from Mira. He looked at the readings. Complex, interdependent, beautiful in the way CAS engineering was always beautiful, and fragile in the specific way that beautiful things were fragile when someone had prioritized the beauty over the durability. Every single one of those fragilities was going to be fixed. Not because anyone required it, not for the triple rate or the impressive title or the politics of a palace that had been running on temporary patches for too long, because that was the work. And the work here was worth doing. Outside the crystal windows, the floating gardens moved through the morning light slow and luminous, their patterns following the structural logic of the array beneath them. Elegance and function together, each one making the other possible. Dex Callum opened his toolkit and got to work.